We've seen large disasters unfold with very little or limited warning. This is where artificial intelligence does come in. A lot
Mhm.
of these data centers are very energy intensive. We can take the example of Pakistan as well here because we do see the weather forecasting has not performed accurately.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of DigiPod on DawnNews English. I'm your host, Usama Khilji, and today we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and climate change. We've heard quite a bit about the advancements in AI and how that's made life and work so much easier, not to forget taking away so many jobs from people and transforming the education sector. But what's not talked about enough is the climate impact of artificial intelligence. But that's not all we're going to talk about today. We're also going to delve into, can we benefit from AI in terms of climate change adaptation, mitigation, and a lot more. To discuss all of this, we're lucky to be joined by Dawar Hameed Butt, who's a climate change expert. So thank you very much for joining us, Dawar, and we're looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me,
So,
Osama. Happy to be here.
so to start with, maybe you can tell us a bit about what has been the impact of artificial intelligence in terms of its data centers, etc., on climate change, because we're hearing about, deferring water levels because it requires a huge amount of water. And of course, that's bound to have environmental impact. So, what is the situation?
So I think to start off the conversation, the concerns around AI and particularly around data centers, they go back to a couple of years because as the global economy especially has become more and more dependent on digital services. A lot of us consume entertainment and media through these digital services as well. And all of it is centralized or sort of dependent on these data centers. With the rise of AI, the amount of data processing power that is required has, I think, exponentially risen, and that essentially has made the business of running a data center quite profitable. So private
Mm,
enterprises have jumped in. You have new companies popping up. You have governments which are subsidizing or themselves involved in the development of data centers. And these data centers are essentially meant to run your large LLMs or large language models, which are at the backbone of AI and the processing we're seeing. Now, we know that the United States, particularly the California-based enterprises such as OpenAI, Anthropic, have come up with very advanced models, and Google, for example, as well has its own models for AI. And then you have other countries as well. We do know that China has taken an independent path and beginning to develop its own models as well. And the rest of the world still is going to be picking and choosing which are the right models to use. But essentially, every country now wants to have its own data centers, both to minimize the costs of running these models as well as security reasons, particularly when running the AI for sovereign purposes. And given that each country's water availability, each country's needs in terms of water security and food security are very different, especially in the developing economy context, we know that having these data centers is going to cause issues for vulnerable populations, which are dependent on fresh water. We'll be diverting away fresh water from potentially other productive reasons to run these data centers. In the context of other regions, you know that where fresh water is completely unavailable, groundwater will be pumped, which again is going to cause environmental issues. So essentially, we are looking at large environmental issues in terms of data, both cooling these data centers, and in some cases, the power generation that is going to be required. A lot
mm,
of these data centers are very energy intensive. They're going to be driven by either nuclear power or going to be driven by thermal energy, which has its own water usage footprint. And until and unless we can guarantee 100% renewable energy for these data centers, we will see that these are going to be water guzzling machines and potentially creating havoc in terms of environment as well as socioeconomic vulnerabilities for people in the developing world.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's so important for there to be further innovation for data centers because, we hear about the early computer back in the 1970s or 80s or before, we had the CPUs. We hear about how one computer was this entire building. And it sounds like we're at that stage of data centers when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I wonder how much is being done in order to gain advancement and, get a data center as big as an Apple Watch or mobile phone like we do today. But having talked about, the climate risks of artificial intelligence linked data centers, maybe you can run us through about how AI can be used for climate modeling and extreme weather prediction, and what's the potential there, or what's the current scenario?
So this is where we do see benefits of AI, particularly in regions where the weather modeling capacity has been quite limited. We can take the example of Pakistan as well here because we do see the weather forecasting has not performed accurately. We've seen large disasters unfold with very little or limited warning. And potentially you can trace the response or the poor response all the way back till poor forecasting. This is where artificial intelligence does come in. We currently do depend on certain weather models, usually called numerical weather forecasting models, and these numerical models have been developed with a global scenarios in mind. And then you have to what we call downscale or sort of pick up a region and try to forecast using that global model for that little region. It could be a city, it could be, in our cases, provinces and the whole country. And we do see that there are still large error margins, or in some cases, over exaggeration, under exaggeration, depending on the season, depending on the geography. So this is where AI comes in because AI will pick up historical observations. It can potentially include climate scenarios in mind and tell you that based on these particular climate scenarios and your historical data, you have certain frequency of certain extreme events during this period of time, and looking at the current weather in the last 3, 4, 6 months, this is what could potentially happen. So it comes up with probabilities, provides you that based on all the data that has been fed into the system, this is the highest probability, possible flood events, possible extreme heat waves, large air pollution events as well. And we are seeing benefits like these happening in parts of the world. We know that it's been deployed in North America. We know it's being deployed in South American countries like Ecuador, where extreme rainfall events are being predicted. Giving the response system, particularly your agencies and disaster management authorities, a bit of time to respond. And essentially, creating this space where the extreme event hasn't unfolded, but the local government has time to react along with disaster management agencies. This is a potential use case that is quite beneficial. In the larger scheme of things, we know that scientists are also using similar use cases to come up with the advanced or future-looking models of what the eventual world could look like, meaning anything
Mm.
from species extinction of species, impacts on global agriculture, impacts on global weather circulation patterns. All of that is being helped, and I do think that these are the sort of benefits we will that the use cases will continue to expand. At the same time, we need to think of ways to make these data centers, as you're saying, that probably at that stage, for example, when, during the industrial revolution, every country wanted to accelerate to progress and did not really consider the environmental impacts. well in 200 years into the Industrial Revolution. So this is potentially where we are at. The global competition is driving a lot of these things, government policies as well, and eventually a balance will have to be struck, but it needs to be sooner or more well thought out than simply aiming for more and more expansion.
Yeah, because population growth is, so high. And if you're looking at arid climates, I was reading about in the United States and Texas, there are towns who are running out of drinking water because huge data centers are in the neighborhoods, and there's just not enough available for them. We've also seen how AI is being used for energy grid optimization and renewable forecasting. So I guess it can also help optimize, energy supplies. Do you see that currently happening, or is there potential? And how much benefit can that give, overall?
In cases, particularly in cases in countries in Europe, we are seeing this happening. The reason why AI optimization is required is because on a day-to-day basis, you will have changing patterns of usage. Particularly in the case of renewables, where there will be certain peaks, and those peaks are usually supplemented
Mm,
by other energy systems. So their production has to be reduced in order to ensure that the grid does not overexceed its capacity. At the same time, we're also seeing in case of California that the renewable energy is being aligned with the battery storage capacity in the state. So you have potential days when the state could run on the battery's stored energy as well. But to make sure that the system is optimized to again prevent overloading it, the AI component has to come in. The data that it uses looks into people's energy consumption regionally, at the household level as well, and then looks at other factors such as climate, looks at daylight availability, looks at certain festival events such as, you'll have more energy consumption potentially on the 4th of July weekend in the US. So all of that
mm.
data allows you to predict and prepare that this is the type of energy requirement. And on other days, it might be less than that, it might be higher than that. So again, this is a bit of machine learning involved, then artificial intelligence giving you insights on what to do with the system. And then system operator is able to run it at the optimal levels. There is still a large room for growth here. I think because in the case of developing countries such as ours, we have the system that is still dependent on traditional conventional methods. Some of it is due to a lack of data availability. Data is being not gathered as effectively, so it can, you cannot have this type of optimization for each country, but it's again a new use case that can be beneficial in the long run as well.
Right. And then we're also looking at conservation, right? And especially when we're seeing so much deforestation happening, also illegally at such a large scale. Um, and then there's the issue of, biogases, methane leaks, etc. Um, are you seeing AI being helpful in conservation as well, or is there potential there? And especially when it comes to the Pakistani context.
I think the reason of course, there's a application here for AI and advanced data analytical tools, but I think the reason we won't see a lot of progress in case of countries like Pakistan or even the broader region is that the quality of data needed to really highlight
Mm,
these issues is dependent on a lot of things, deforestation or methane leakage, the amount of instruments or the expenses required to build and operate these instruments is quite high for a country like ours. They're eventually going to depend on either globally available data, which we do. It's not as accurate. It does give you insights which can show you changes over time, but it won't be very helpful in real time catching culprits in case of deforestation or catching methane leaks and saying that, this needs to be plugged. It is more like a post event assessment that can be done using satellite imagery. In other cases, we're seeing that, in the global north, advanced satellite instruments are available more readily. The data is available through commercial licenses, and then operators, in case of methane leakages such as oil refineries, they can potentially access that data and be prepared or prevent further leakages. Um, at the same time, I think that there is definitely need for this to happen because issues like these, especially spread over large geographies, you cannot depend on actually humans monitoring these issues. You need to depend on technology which can cover vast swathes of land. It would either be some sort of I would say drone and visual monitoring, again with instruments that can help capture these changes, or it will require Earth observation linked to satellite systems. So that is where we will see a lot of application. We are seeing applications already in case of changes in water levels, agricultural yields as well. We are seeing how in certain cases, in Japan, for example, you're able to observe that the cherry blossom season comes sooner and sooner through, again, satellite imagery. That's a proxy for more warmer spring as well. And then, incidentally, those records go back 10, 12 centuries because the Japanese emperors used to track those seasons that way. So there is a very key, easy correlation to derive. In our case, the data maintenance, data records are not as vast. So there is a use case, but it will definitely depend on the quality and the quantity of data being fed into it.
And that makes sense because I mean, yeah, it's all dependent on your language models. And if you don't have enough data feeding them, then of course the predictability suffers. The Pakistani Prime Minister announced a huge package for artificial intelligence in Pakistan. I think this was in February, which included investment in data centers. Um, Seeing as Pakistan is a water scarce country and seeing as Pakistan is one of the worst hit by climate change, what mitigations could Pakistan put in place to go ahead with that AI development that's necessary for progress and competition globally, but at the same time safeguarding the climate change impacts of doing so?
I think number one, a country like Pakistan does not need to prioritize data centers. This is the first thing that we need to look into. I'm sure the reasons currently are securing a certain level of data which is not connected to the international system because each country requires a certain secure cloud or data center availability as well. So in some cases, we can assume that the capacity being built won't be that large, and the footprints would be similar to our energy infrastructure. Regardless of that, I think the way this needs to be managed is to ensure that the technology being picked up is more oriented to efficiency, meaning that perhaps it can use recycled water, and the system is allied with the ability to treat and recycle water that can be reutilized. It can also be in case of cooling systems, there is availability of other new methods available that can reduce the usage of water while using other coolants. And I think the last part is that there are a lot of novel technologies coming up. Large countries especially, are now experimenting with data centers that would be based beyond the Earth's atmosphere, meaning that their cooling requirements will be
Mm,
completed using, the region of space is in -10 degrees, so it will use that level of cooling. So perhaps the capacity that we build locally does not need to be very massive. It just needs to cater to the minimal requirements of secure communications. And then we can depend on our partners in the region, which are able to, utilize more energy conservative systems. Perhaps, teaming up with China to explore how we can use broader data centers, which are more energy efficient. So this is where I would say, and the resources that Pakistan has need to be diverted to organizing talent that would be required to manage these systems.
Mm,
So this is where perhaps our focus should be. Aim capacity building of local talent, designing tools that are more suited to our needs, such as we're talking about weather modeling. This is where those resources need to be diverted, ensuring that the AI systems being developed are compatible with local languages, which people speak.
mm.
So, this is the level of innovation that we should aim for rather than physical infrastructure all alone. And we will perhaps see larger benefits coming out of that level of innovation.
And that's a very important point, Dawar, because it reminds me of just last year when we saw floods hit Pakistan again. And there's this very important story from, I think it was Hunza, if I'm not mistaken, where a local shepherd was able to warn an entire village of a glacier lake outburst flood. And because of his whistling and relaying that message to the village in time, so many lives were saved. And of course, technology, it's hard for technology to substitute that, but it's important for technology to take into account the indigenous systems that exist, such as human intelligence that works in a localized indigenous manner, and then maybe take help from that to scale further. We've also seen after the 2022 floods, Pakistan ran a very successful campaign internationally in trying to get reparations and funding for climate adaptation, mitigation. Where does that stand? And you know what? And this. The reason I'm asking is that you spoke very eloquently about the need for upskilling. And of course, that requires a lot of expertise and a lot of resources, and we're also seeing that Pakistan has not managed to build the capacity to be able to receive that funding and spend it, which seems to have been, another missed opportunity. So how do you see us sort of, moving this forward and trying to get that international help and build that capacity?
Well, I think in some cases the country has been successful. I wouldn't say that, based on what happened in the floods of 2022, we did come up with a number which was in billions of dollars of losses, and even billions more for the reconstruction and rehabilitation. We've not been able to touch that number. What has happened is that certain governments at the subnational level, where the floods were the most extreme, they have been able to come up with project-based solutions. They won't be able to construct each and every structure that was destroyed, but they're coming up with housing, they're coming up with utilities and facilities that are more resilient. So perhaps you won't see mud houses being built up in rural areas again, but you will see small, more resilient houses, which are following some level of, climate adaptation needs as well. And then there are other programs that are helping governments come up with more advanced forecasting and preparedness as well, and physical infrastructure that could sort of also delay the worst impact of a particular flood in case of river floods. So we are seeing that level of support coming in. It is definitely not touching 60 billion or 70 billion dollars. It's about, 9 to 10 billion dollars over a period of time, and we will see certainly more projects coming in because there's a recognition at the international level that the resources that go to Pakistan are most, well utilized in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation. It is going to benefit the public health system. It benefits the, continuity of systems in terms of utilities, education, availability of services. So that's the sort of calculation behind these projects and resources being given to the country. And at the same time, there is a recognition that there has been enough progress in Pakistan, particularly what the public has been able to achieve in terms of raising, getting itself aware. I know that
Mm.
the Pakistani public is possibly right now one of the most sensitive to weather forecasts. They would look into weather forecasts, they would prepare their day accordingly, and same for air pollution, they would prepare accordingly. And that has happened because people have, certainly experienced these hazards and they're preparing
Yeah.
themselves. In terms of energy planning, a lot of rural areas are now completely dependent on off-grid solar access. City households connected to the grid are using solar as backup as well. So again, there's international recognition that the change is already people-driven, and rather than recognizing and assisting it, why not, align ourselves to the same change as well? So perhaps this is where we do see change in Pakistan, that it won't come through just government policies. Government might actually be
Mm.
lagging in terms of the policy change. It will definitely be more driven by economy and efficiency. And that is what we're seeing, that people recognize that there needs to be more economic safeguards in terms of energy. The usage of energy needs to be more efficient. The way they build their houses needs to be more, conducive to the heat and the cold as well, to storms. All of that is now come happening. These are certainly changes, some of it already taken full path of being adopted, but some of them are now being adopted as well.
And speaking of international cooperation, just this week, I think Pakistan and Norway signed a carbon market deal under the Paris Agreement. Maybe you can walk us through what does this mean? I don't understand, these terms.
So it's essentially what is being dubbed as a carbon market. It was established under the Paris Agreement, and the previous version of this carbon trading system has actually existed for the last 30 years. What we are seeing now is becoming much more defined. It's becoming much more formalized. And what we're going to see is government to government deals, meaning that while there will be private sector, private operators in this space, what we've signed is that the government of Pakistan agrees to set up a certain project which will offset carbon locally, and those will be then considered as a certain number of units. Those units Norway can acquire from us in exchange of either euros or USD or any other currency. And then Norway can say that because we are a historically large emitter, we're going to use these units to showcase that it's actually Norway that has been offset, while Pakistan on this side benefits by the monetary resources coming in. Essentially, Pakistan is not a large emitter. It has a very low per capita emission, and it can continue to develop while ensuring that it is achieving that development in a sustainable format, which Pakistan has declared through its international commitments. So that's what we're seeing. Other countries are also doing it. We do know that particularly European countries are aiming to be the major buyers. So there are opportunities here. The way Pakistan can benefit, again, we've discussed this by reducing deforestation, preserving forests,
Mm.
by increasing forests as well, to increase our carbon offset capabilities, and then also offsetting other emissions. We do know that we have a big issue where methane leaks happen from our large waste dumps. So if we manage our waste more properly, we can reduce that emission as well. And the resources that come in are in many cases linked to achieving these targets. For example, a country like Norway or Switzerland or Sweden can come up and say that, oh, we want to give you resources if you manage to curtail your methane emissions. So the resources that Pakistan get would partly be redirected to setting up a project which will actually be reducing or managing those methane emissions. And the same we are seeing with other, such as in livestock and agricultural sectors as well. There will be opportunities to do this. It requires a lot of local capacity building in terms of designing these projects as well, and then finding the right partner. In this case, it's Norway, but finding other partners as well who can actually come and support you and be the buyers of those credits. It's very important. And hopefully, we will see more progress in this regard as well.
No, thank you for explaining that. And it seems like there's a huge financial incentive in, this entire model, which should work in our benefit. So that we've spoken about the mitigation aspect, adaptation aspect, and we've, also talked about how AI could potentially be used to predict weather patterns. Um, However, I'm just thinking, is this sort of like a break-even situation where right now the climate damage outweighs the climate benefits, and will we reach some point where the benefits start to, exceed the cost of using AI in terms of climate? Or are we looking at, AI being a huge threat and then there being need for adaptation to AI and data centers in order to cope with the climate change effects that we're dealing with?
Well, I think certainly AI right now, the race to build the AI infrastructure, it is not beneficial from the perspective of the broader economy. There is what we call an economic bubble around it. People are putting in, excessive resources, and we're still not seeing that, number one, the capacity being installed would actually be utilized fully. The technology developers or the firms behind certainly see that there is uptake of the memory systems as well as the what we call the GPUs, the processing units required to run these systems. But at the same time, the essentially people are over planning for this right now. The bubble, the financial bubble, economic bubble around it will eventually collapse, meaning that a lot of this infrastructure would then go to waste. So
Mm,
planning for it more optimally is definitely going to be required going forward. At the same time, the thing with each development or technology that we've seen over the past many centuries is that there is always going to be a push to make it more efficient, meaning that
mm,
certainly the people behind it know that efficiency is going to be more profitable. So they will find ways to reduce the burden on energy systems as well as maintenance that will be required for these systems. The system will gradually become possibly more, beneficial over time. Um, we do need to think of other areas where it might be impacting, which would be particularly livelihoods. AI
mm,
is likely to, lead to large job losses, and countries need to be prepared for that. What would be the sort of skill development needed? What would be the sort of workforce planning that governments should be doing? We're not seeing that particularly in developing countries. So that is specifically something I think is hand in hand more as important for policymakers. And lastly, I do think that this is one of those technologies which is going to stay. We can legislate to make it more efficient. We will see internationally there will be efforts to make it more efficient, but there is likely never going to be a reversal from this. So
mm,
perhaps the intention now for policymakers should be to recognize that what is the way to make it more environment friendly, more energy efficient. We've seen how a simple thing as a light bulb 30 years ago would consume hundreds of watts of energy. And over time, it's become much more efficient. You can run a bulb now for 5 watts, for 3 watts as well of energy as well. So we definitely need to see that level of improvement in the next decade to ensure that the system itself is not a liability. Rather, it brings more benefits to the table than taking away from our ecosystems and the human experience as well.
Oh, thank you very much for joining us, Dawar, and for enlightening
Yeah.
us on so many burning questions that exist related to artificial intelligence and climate change. And what from what we've discussed, we clearly see that there's a lot of opportunities using AI in order to deal with the impact of climate change. But are we at the point where the benefits outweigh the cost? Right now, clearly, we're not there yet, and the cost is very high. So clearly, there needs to be further investment and research, and perhaps like we're trying to adapt to climate change, we also need to adapt to artificial intelligence in an efficient manner that really thinks about the vulnerable populations that are impacted the most. And of course, the impact is wide scale on everyone. We've seen how Pakistan has been the hardest hit, not just by climate change, but related to that air pollution as well. So can we afford to invest in technologies that can make that situation worse? Perhaps not, but there need to be very efficient planning and thinking into this. So thank you very much for joining us. That's it from us today. We'll be back with another episode of DigiPod on DawnNews English next week on Wednesday. Thank you.
Breathe Pakistan.
A Dawn Media initiative.
Let's weather the change
Together.